Hello, and welcome to WISA's second webinar, WISA Talks on Data Analytics and Optimization. I am Dr. Suzanne Kearns, the founding director of WISA. Thank you to our community, industry and government partners, students, staff and faculty, and our friends who have joined us virtually today. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Waterloo is situated on the Halldale Tract, land that was promised to the Six Nations of the Grand River and is the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabeg, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We also acknowledge and respect the diverse histories and cultures of all Indigenous peoples of this country. Acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous peoples. I encourage you to take a moment and acknowledge the traditional territory that you are residing on today. Before we dive in, we would really love to know where everyone is joining us from today. If you could, please share your location with us by typing it in the chat box. Because of COVID protocols, I am joining you from my basement in Kitchener, Ontario, but hopefully we have guests from perhaps a variety of different locations. As a reminder, if you have questions during the event, please type them within the Q&A tool, and you're also welcome to share comments with us in the chat tool. I'd like to briefly introduce you to the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics. WISA is a new research institute at the University of Waterloo with a mission to become the world's leading hub for sustainable aeronautical research, technology, and education. The core of our work is to foster interdisciplinary research, cross-sector partnerships, and experiential learning towards a sustainable future for the air transport sector. Thank you for joining us for our WISA Talks webinar, within which we bring together a panel of academic and industry leaders for a deep dive into sustainability challenges being faced within the air transport sector. At WISA, we consider the three pillars of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic. In our first webinar a few weeks ago, we explored evidence-based training, a key aspect of social sustainability within our sector. Next month, we'll have another WISA Talks event discussing environmental sustainability. However, today's discussion, we will explore data analytics and optimization as key drivers of economic sustainability for air operators. I'm excited to learn more about how data is informing and optimizing various processes, both within daily operations and academic research. I would now like to turn the webinar over to our moderator, the Associate Director of WISA, who leads the economic pillar of sustainability within our institute, Dr. Shi Cao. Dr. Cao is an Associate Professor in the Systems Design Engineering Department. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Kearns, for the introduction. My name is Shi Cao. I will be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm an associate professor from System Design Engineering at University of Waterloo, and I'm also an associate director of WISA. My research is in the field of human factors and pilot performance modeling. Thank you everyone who have joined us virtually today from many different places around the world. Today's topic is about data analytics and optimization. I think there are two aspects where models and data analytics can help improve aeronautical sustainability. At the micro level, about individual performance and crew resource management, we can model pilot performance, skill development, and skill retention to support evidence-based and competence-based training. New training innovation can improve safety and reduce fuel consumption used for training. At the macro level, about flight planning and air traffic control, big data analytics and optimization can also help improve efficiency and reduce wasted energy. Before we start, I would like to quickly introduce our panelists who have joined us today. From our industrial partners, we have Dr. Logan Jones, Analytics Manager in Flight Planning at NAVBLUE, an Airbus company. Allyson Kukel, Head of Airline Engagement at Halldale Group and founder of Rooted in Com. Julia Nuttall, Manager of Corporate Sustainability and Performance at NAV Canada. From University of Waterloo, we have myself, Dr. Fatma Gzara, Professor in the Department of Management Science, Dr. Mehrdad Pirnia, Lecturer in the Department of Management Science, and Jingru Yan, a PhD student from System Design Engineering. Actually, Jingru is also co-supervised by Dr. Kearns and myself. Okay, now let's start our presentation. Each speaker will have about 5 minutes, and we will make turns between researchers and industrial practitioners. Please allow me to start with myself talking about research in my lab. I'm interested in simulation and predicting pilot performance using computational models. In general, there are two kinds of models, theory-driven models and data-driven models. Recently, as the advancement in machine learning and deep learning neural network technologies, data-driven models have received a lot of attention and popularity. This approach requires a large amount of data. For example, pilot performance data, mental workload, situation awareness, and also instructor evaluation verbal transcripts can be recorded, and using different sensor technologies, survey questions, and the flight simulator, we can collect those type of data. Then we will extract the features and label those data with corresponding labels such as good or bad performance. And then we fed this data into machine learning tools. After training, the models would be able to predict new cases with a certain level of accuracy. So there are pros and cons of this approach. The good thing is the modeling logic is relatively simple. So researchers, we don't need to worry about the mechanisms of pilots' thinking and strategy. We just need to ask the model to learn the pattern and do the prediction. This is the reason why this approach is regarded as a black box method, meaning that we don't know the cognitive mechanism of pilot performance. However, the bad thing is we do need a lot of data to support training. On the other hand, the theory-driven models may complement the black box approach by treating the human mind as a transparent glass box, where researchers will define the cognitive mechanism, mental capacity, the rules and the knowledge used by the pilots to perform the task. Those works as kind of the gears inside this transparent glass box. In this approach, we need to analyze the task, build knowledge graphs and production rules to represent the skills, and run computer simulation to predict what could be achieved if a cognitive model is equipped with these knowledge and skills, trying to fit and match human data at each level of skill development. You can see that pilot data here is crucial for both approaches. These data support model validation and model training. I think the two types of modeling approaches can be integrated to support automated pilot performance assessment and training, and we're currently accumulating our pilot database using different levels of simulators. Okay, next, let's welcome Jingru Yan. She is a PhD student from our lab. She also has experience working in aviation industry as a human performance and safety specialist. She will be talking about her research using flight data recording to track human factors risk in the aviation. Please welcome Jingru.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Tao, for the introduction. Today, I will briefly talk about the research project I conducted during my master's program. It's identifying opportunities of tracking major human factors risk through flight data monitoring. Flight data monitoring is a process that nowadays has been implemented in many major airlines around the world. When we talk about flight data, most of us would think about the flight data recorder, which is also called the black box. It's a different type of black box as compared to what Dr. Cao was just introduced. It's a data recording device installed on the aircraft. But nowadays, we are able to use the quick access recorder on most of the modern aircraft to record as many parameters as flight data recorder, and is more accessible for a routine data analytics purpose. So the research question was, since human factor is a major component and plays an important role in many aviation incident and accident, the research shows that nearly 60 to 80% of aviation incident and accident was actually contributed by human factor issues. So the question was, is there any opportunity that we could proactively identify the human factors risks and the root causes of human errors through a more objective data source? And the flight data provides us this type of opportunity because it's an already implemented program, and it provides us lots of data, and those type of data is more objective compared to what we are currently using, the safety reports. So if we are able to proactively identify emerging aviation human factor issues through flight data monitoring program, then we'll be able to better understand the emerging human factors risks through flight data analytics. And we'll also be able to expand the use of flight data monitoring process and provide suggestions to accident prevention practices and future training programs. To be able to achieve these goals, the project was conducted in 3 major phases during 2 years period. First step was to identify the emerging human factor risk through accident data analysis and interviews of airline professionals. Second stage was to study study the flight data monitoring process, to review and the last part is to potentially look at the use of flight data for diagnosing human factor risks related factors components by grouping parameters based on its relationship to pilot behavior. The project finally proposed the 2 potential approaches. The first one is to create new human factor events in the current flight data monitoring profile. And the second is to use the current event settings for human factor focused studies. For a very straightforward example is to use the altitude deviation event, and then we can monitor and track flight crew's reaction time. And then from that, we'll be able to analyze the vigilance level and active monitoring performance. There's future work needs to be done, and there's limitations and challenges for this project. First, it needs a mature program for validation, and second, it's a very high level confidentiality data. So there's a labor relation component in it as well. And it has the ability to track a selected group of human factor issues, but not all of them. Can you go to the next slide, please? And further that, I want to talk about, based on my personal experience, some of the current practices that we're using in the airline industry of applying human factors in airline safety data analysis. The first part is to use human factor related knowledges and models to analyze the safety reports. Second part is to conduct the human factor related studies, especially on the emerging issues involving pilots' performance and operator SOP non-compliance, and also specific topics such as distractions, cognitive biases, situational awareness, and workload management. Last but not least, a very important area that we apply human factors in as training, especially pilot performance training. A very good example is the crew resource management training. We apply human factors concepts and guidance in the pilots to support the pilots' CRM training design and delivery. That ends my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jingru, for the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our first industry partner, Allyson Kukel, Head of Airline Engagement at Halldale Group and founder of Rooted.com. Allyson is leading an effort to promote big data flight training. Let's welcome Allyson, please.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I am Allyson Kukel. I'm based in the Netherlands. I would first like to give a big congratulations to Dr. Kearns and the WISA team. I mean, it's fantastic to see this effort and all the hard work get off the ground. And I just want to focus on this big data working group that we've put together. So if you want to just go to the next slide, thank you. So I'm the product owner of an effort between the Halldale Group, which I lead airline engagement for, and the ATPG. The ATPG is the Aircrew Training Policy Group, which is a subgroup of YASA. And YASA is basically our Transport Canada for everybody that's based in Canada. And what we realized is every year we bring together the European heads of training, and they have a discussion on the most critical issues to them of the upcoming year. And because we had to meet virtually in 2020, what we ended up doing was creating the Leader Forum. And the Leader Forum was 5 specific topics that were really imperative to the heads of training that they wanted to discuss, which is what we went through last year. So we talked about skill decay because that was the #1 issue at the start of 2021. XR, VR technologies, EBT, CBTA, so evidence-based training or competency-based training and assessment, big data, and UPRT. And as we talked through this over last year, big data just kept bubbling up to the surface because data is part of all 5 of those topics. And what we realized is the industry was really looking for some guidance on what do we do? How do we make sense of it? Everything that was just presented, that's in a tremendous amount of data that is just coming out of flight data monitoring. That's not even talking about data that's coming out of the training programs. So what we did, if you want to go to the next slide, thank you, is we decided to take an agile approach to a white paper. So we've put together a very small and sporty team to really help the industry come together with a really smooth overview of how they can use big data, some rules and guidance, making it usable and actionable, making it understandable. And so the team has been working really hard since the end of last summer on the MVP, and the MVP will be ready for peer review at the end of this month. And subsequently, we will be publishing. And we look forward to the 2nd and 3rd iterations. I did put the windy road there because we've used the agile approach, we can see that sometimes with our peer reviews, we might end up, correcting our course as needed. And I think it's important. I can let you read the slide for what's included in our big data MVP, is to just tell you a tiny bit about our team, because the team is incredibly impressive, and it's the hard work that's being done behind the scenes that's really moving this forward. So we have Andy Mitchell. He is the chair of the ATPG, and he's also the founder of Use Before Flight. We have Luis Martins. He is also an ATPG member, and he's the chief theoretical knowledge instructor at the Flight Training Europe Center in Spain. We have Jur Krijgen. He's the R&D engineer at NLR here in the Netherlands, and he flies regularly holding a CPL and a frozen ATPL. So he's, kind of a double threat in that regard because he is a pilot and he's quite knowledgeable. We have Scott Nutter. He has more than 20 years of experience at Delta Airlines, and he's recently started his own business, which focuses on improving human performance in high risk or consequence industries. He also is an expert in AQP, and AQP is kind of the North American, or at least American equivalent of EBT or CBT as we discuss it in Europe. And then finally, we have Dr. Patricia Knabel-Schmitz, and she is the flight training human factors expert at Emirates. And she's also been responsible for their digital transformation in regards to data analytics for EBT. So you see that we've brought together a very international team to really tackle this conversation, because we don't want it to be one-sided. We want it to be very inclusive, and we want to make sure that it's accessible for operators of any scope or size. So with that, I will turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Allyson. The previous speakers have talked about optimization and data analytics in personal level, individual pilot performance. Next, we have speakers will focus on macro level flight planning optimization. Let's welcome Dr. Fatma Gzara, professor in Department of Management Science, to tell us about her research in airline operations optimization, please.
Hi, Cher. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Cher, for the introduction, and thanks to the WISA team for this amazing organization of WISA Talks, the whole series, and this specific one. So in this first slide, I will talk about my research expertise in general, and actually I'm going to represent my research lab, the Waterloo Analytics and Optimization Lab, which is part of the Department of Management Sciences and the Faculty of Engineering of the University of Waterloo. The general arching framework is optimization. Our expertise is in large-scale optimization, and this is a very rich modeling framework where we can model yes or no decisions, discrete features, multiple decision makers with potentially conflicting objectives, and random operations. For example, we use a lot of robust and stochastic type models, which, depending on the characterization of those random features, we would use one or the other. It turns out that also a very interesting feature of the type of modeling we use is networks. A lot of the models we develop end up to be models on networks. So we have also expertise in network optimization, and that's very related to airline operations, just because they're all, most of them, if not all, are modeled on networks. So these optimization models, when written on paper, they're nice and compact, but they are generally very challenging to solve, and a model without a solution is not that useful either. So there are very powerful software like Cplex and Groovy, which are actually very, very competitive, except that when it comes to large scale and some nonlinear features like robustness and stochasticity, these models are still very difficult to solve, and those software fail. And that's where another aspect of my research comes in, which is developing complex methodologies or algorithms to solve these problems. So we have expertise in decomposition methods, for example, column generation. And those who are from the airline industry know that column generation is one of the most successful and most used algorithms to solve large-scale and complex airline planning decisions. So in general, these are the two kind of theoretical aspects, the modeling framework and solution methodology development. However, our work is in the area of applied optimization. So application is also a very important dimension of my work and the work of my colleagues and our research students at the Waterloo Analytics and Optimization Lab. One of the major application areas is in supply chain and logistics. For example, we solve a lot of strategic design type problems where we incorporate locations, sizing, technology selection, inventory optimization, And for example, if you look at the world map on the top right corner, that's our solution to one of Bombardier's problem. It's actually top left, sorry. If you zoom in on the other side, I don't know my right from left, so that's okay. Yeah, so that's, a few years ago, we did a project with Bombardier on optimizing their spare parts supply chain. And the main decisions were on inventory stocking and deciding on where to place hubs, distribution hubs and distribution centers. And that was one of our recommendations to that problem. Some other aspects that we model are risk mitigation, and risk could mean many things depending on the context. I want to highlight just one very recent piece of work, which I'm very proud of, and that's a work on COVID-19 supply chain issues. So we have some work that's being published on the allocation and distribution of critical supplies and equipment to minimize risk of infection to healthcare workers. And in this work, we incorporate risk functions like those that come out of the SIR models into supply chain design problems to optimize basically or minimize risk to healthcare workers. So this is a very timely topic and it's very useful. So that's why I wanted to mention it here. Another dimension that we work on in supply chain is sustainable operations. For example, we have work on accounting for product footprints throughout the supply chain, from the supply point to the consumer, and designing these supply chain networks and that by accounting for demand, consumer demand, which is sensitive to economical footprint or environmental footprint of whatever they consume. So this is a different, quite a different angle from what is generally done in supply chain design, where it's mostly about optimizing costs. We also have quite a bit of work in e-warehousing, which came out of collaborations with Dematic, which is a global leader in supply chain solutions. For example, the figure on the top where you see the boxes there, that's a solution that we have to the three-dimensional bin packing problem. So we have a solver that solves what's known in the supply chain industry as the palletization problem. So these bins or pallets, what they call pallets in the industry, they may have between 50 and 100 boxes, and our solver can produce one in less than 1 minute. And just to give you a benchmark, the best solver that's out there, Cplex or Groby, either or, they fail to solve instances with just 5 to 10 boxes. So it takes forever for them to solve those problems. So this is also a piece of work where it came out of a collaboration with an industry partner, and it made a difference in the industry. Going back to the figure, so the another application area is in transportation and routing. So related to sustainability, for example, we have work on infrastructure design for electric vehicle traffic. We have work on transport network design for hazmat transportation, and recently a lot of work on last mile delivery through very innovative and novel strategies like using drones and crowdsourcing. The other major application area is airline operations, which I will talk about in the next slide. So, so how does this relate to data analytics, which is the other part of the title of this talk, so optimization and data analytics? What we do is we model and solve and analyze. And if that's based on real data, then that's probably what we call data analytics. So that's why I have data analytics that's also horizontally covering all of the aspects of my research. And when we work with collaborators, or when the work is based on real data, then we tend to use this definition of data analytics, and that is the descriptive, predictive, and then prescriptive. So we try to understand the operations from the data, and the figure in the top right corner at this moment, yeah, that's that's a process flow chart of an operation that we studied, that we derived totally from the data. So the power of data is that we can actually understand the whole operation just from the data without any background knowledge. And then predictive, meaning predicting any random behaviors in the system, and then using all of that information to come up with decisions, and that's the prescriptive part. So, for example, for example, this figure shows how we use data analytics to solve problems. This is an illustration of the solution we came up with in a collaboration with Dematic again on workforce optimization, where we use data from any warehouse to understand the operation, figure out the bottlenecks, predict distributions of random operations, and then optimize the operation, simulate, observe the metrics, and adjust. So it's a kind of an iterative process that is once it's there, then it's totally independent. It doesn't use a lot of user input except for inputting the data and then setting some high-level parameters to come up with optimal schedules to guide the operation. So with this, I want to acknowledge some of our industry collaborators: Bombardier, Unilever, NAVBLUE, at that time NAVTech when we worked with them, Air Matrix, Mr. Transmission. I hope I didn't forget some. Anyway, so can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so now I will talk a bit about our work on research in the space of airline operations. And the figure on the right is basically, or left, it's just the one figure here. That's basically what I mean when I say airline operations. This goes from schedule generation up to crew scheduling. And we either worked on these problems or we have expertise to work on these problems to make these decisions. So now I'm going to talk specifically about some of the research projects that we did on this topic. The first one was a collaboration with NAVBLUE on enhancing the performance of their airline crew optimization system. So those who work on these types of problems know that the bottleneck is to solve the, sorry. The bottleneck is to solve the column generation master problem, and that's where our work fell in at that point. We also have work where we incorporated flight delays in crew pairing optimization to come up with robust crew pairs so that delays do not necessarily impact the schedules as they are being performed. We have work where we incorporated crew fatigue functions into the pairing optimization problem directly. And one of the findings that we have, interesting findings that we have here, is that we can actually account for a lot of business rules like work hours and rest hours just by incorporating the fatigue functions into the crew pairing optimization problem. Recently, I have some work on a workload balancing for flight dispatcher scheduling. So I became interested in this problem after I supervised the design project for Air Canada on optimizing their flight dispatcher scheduling. It turns out that this is a very resource-intensive task, except that there's no research whatsoever on it in the literature. So this is basically a very good opportunity first to contribute to the industry and also contribute research-wise. And we now have column generation-based solutions to solve the flight dispatcher scheduling problem with workload balancing features. One last topic, which is tangentially relevant to airline operations, but it's relevant to WISA activities. That's the design of traffic networks for drones. So far, drones have been used in enclosed spaces, but the infrastructure is not there to use drones in large-scale commercial operations in the open skies. Our skies are not ready yet, just partly because of the regulations and the absence of regulations around traffic networks. And this is going to be a collaboration with an industry partner on designing those traffic networks. I'm going to stop here.
Okay, thank you, Fatma,
Thank you,
for the great presentation. To tie into Dr. Gzara's research, we have Dr. Logan Jones, who works on operational analytics for NAVBLUE to improve efficiency and planning airline flight operations and innovate to provide airlines with solutions for sustainability. Dr. Jones, please.
Yes, thank you. So first off, I just want to thank WISA for inviting me to speak on this panel. And on behalf of NAVBLUE, we're very excited to be a partner with WISA and to start to do research in these areas. And as we saw with Dr. Gzara's slides, there's obviously a lot of synergies that we see already between the problems that we face as an industry and the research being done at the University of Waterloo. So just very quickly, for those who might not know NAVBLUE, so we're an Airbus subsidiary dedicated to providing flight operations, services, and solutions. Most of our products are dedicated towards airlines, but we also service and provide solutions to airports and civil aviation authorities. But today, what I want to focus on the data and optimization problems is our ground tools, our tools to help optimize the airline operations. And I want to talk about kind of three key areas where we face this problem of optimization and some of the data and research we're looking to do in order to improve the efficiency of operations. So let's start with crew scheduling. So crew scheduling, as Dr. Gzara has pointed out, is a complex problem trying to optimize the use of your crew, so both your flight crew and your cabin crew, while respecting all of the company regulatory and safety rules that go along with this. So we talk about building a flight schedule. This is usually done several months in advance. And what we want to do is build a flight pairings. So flight pairings is a series of flights that the flight crew and the cabin crew are going to fly over 2 or 3 days. And so they're going to fly from one city to another, have a small layover, and then fly the next flight. They may fly 2 or 3 flights in a day, sleep, and do the same thing. So when we're talking about optimizing this type of problem, so first off, we have to look at the company rules, the union rules, make sure that we're respecting fatigue limits, crew duty limits, duty time, vacation time. But we also have to add in uncertainty. So when we try to optimize this type of problem, if we build the schedule too tight, so we leave only the minimum time of layover, or we try to maximize the amount of hours of flight in a day just to reach the crew duty limits, when we optimize to that point, then any small perturbation during the day, a small flight delay, a weather delay, even traffic, getting the crew from the hotel to the airport, suddenly that small perturbation will have ripple effects across the entire network. Flights get delayed, the flight crew may miss a flight. Now you have flight crew in the wrong city or at the wrong airport, trying to get them back, so then you fly them on other aircraft to get them into the right spot. So when we're trying to optimize, we're really looking at how do we build, we're talking about robust planning. How do we build a plan that is likely to succeed while also optimizing the efficient use of the crew? We also have to then consider, the uncertainties such as sick leave. Obviously with COVID right now, that's having a large impact on airline operations. Trying to predict 2 or 3 months in advance when we're building the schedule, how many reserve crew we might need, how many flight crew are likely to call in sick or to have some sort of constraint where they can't operate the flight. And, this adds a lot of uncertainty to this type of problem. So we're looking for research and optimization in this area. Secondly, we go to the day of operations. So now we have our day of operations, we have our crew assigned to a series of flights, we have aircraft assigned to the flights, and the whole goal here is to stick to the schedule as much as possible because the schedule has been built for profitability. So as long as we can stick to that schedule, that means the airline should be profitable throughout the day. As soon as we start to deviate from the schedule, that's going to start to impact profitability. It's going to start to, again, have this domino effect on your operations. So to give you a quick example, this is the type of view that an ops manager might have. Each line, each row is an aircraft and each block is a flight. So we're trying to make sure that each aircraft can operate the flight and there's crew associated to each flight. Now, what happens if on line number 4, suddenly we find out that this aircraft has a maintenance problem? So maintenance has informed us that the flight is looking at probably a 90-minute delay to fix the maintenance issue, and then we have about another 45 minutes to board the aircraft. So we're looking at over a 2-hour delay. Now, you can see there's been some buffer built into the schedule, but not enough to absorb a 2-hour delay. So now we start to look at how can we cancel or swap flights, swap aircraft in order to mitigate that delay. We'd much rather distribute that 2-hour delay and have 4 flights delayed by 15 minutes than 1 flight delayed 2 hours, which is then going to cause either a cancellation or issues for all of the subsequent flights for that aircraft. So in this case, we could look at substituting the aircraft on line 3, which has a bit more of a buffer period between its 2 flights, and have it fly on that first flight. And then we hope then that the issue with the aircraft, the maintenance issue, is resolved in time for the flight on line 3. If it's not, we also have the aircraft there on line 1, which doesn't actually fly until much later in the day. So if the maintenance issue takes a bit longer, we can also look at swapping the aircraft there. So it's all about trying to optimize the use of both your aircraft and your assets during the day. But the difficulty comes in that each small change are not done in isolation. If we swap the aircraft, we have to ensure that either the flight crew will still be valid to fly, that change in flights is now not going to impact the flight crew, is not going to have them exceed their duty time, that the crew is qualified to fly that aircraft, if it's the same aircraft type or if it's a different aircraft type that has been swapped. So every change has to be made in collaboration with all the members of the airline organization to ensure that the impact of changing flights, canceling flights, swapping aircraft is done. So it becomes a very large optimization problem, which today is mostly just done by people, talking back and forth and the experience of each ops manager. But in the future, we really want to apply data and analytics to, do prescriptive decision making, letting the airline know what could be the best option to optimize your operations. And thirdly, we're going to go to the flight itself. So this is the flight plan. This is, similar to Google Maps, what is the best route to fly, except flight plan is obviously much more complex in terms of the number of, safety and regulatory and airline rules that we must comply with in order to achieve a safe flight. So the goal of flight planning is twofold. The first off is we want to choose the optimal route. Now, optimum can have many different choices depending on the airline's rules and perspective, and even the day of operations. You could be optimizing for time, the quickest flight. You could be optimizing for fuel, lowest fuel consumption. And in most cases, you're probably optimizing for a bit of the both and optimizing for total cost. So the cost of time, the cost of fuel, and also the network costs. Flying over different regions of the world incur different costs as you overfly different countries and states. So we're trying to determine the optimum route. Again, taking into account uncertainties like winds, like weather, and more frequently, what we're seeing is uncertainty in traffic congestion. So just like when we're driving to Toronto in rush hour and Google Maps shows us that it's red everywhere, we want to be able to do the same thing for flight planning. We're seeing congestion be a bigger issue, notably at airports, like New York, like London, even in Toronto. We want to understand how is that congestion happening, what measures are likely going to put into place, and is there a way that myself as an airline, can I mitigate this congestion? Can I take a different route that maybe is going to let me avoid the congested areas? Once we've determined the optimal route, then we need to determine the optimal fuel. So again, we have to calculate the exact fuel necessary for that flight to operate in in an efficient manner, but also complying with all safety regulations, alternate airports, reserve fuel. But we also don't want to add too much fuel. Aircraft burn fuel as a function of their weight. So if we're adding unnecessary additional fuel, what that means is that all along the route, all along this 4-hour flight between Edmonton and Waterloo, we're going to be burning more fuel than we really needed to, which obviously has an environmental impact, contributing to sustainability of aviation. It has an economic impact on the airline burning more fuel than they need. So again, it's an optimization problem in terms of building the best route, but also then managing the fuel and getting the correct fuel reserves. Onto the data side. So just quickly on the data. So we talked about the optimization problem. What data do we have to solve this problem? So there's obviously a lot of data. Airlines, the aviation world, there's a lot of data being created, and I won't go through all of the data here. The difficulty comes with is that aviation is still a bit behind compared to other industries in the accessibility and usability of this data. Aviation is using still a lot of old legacy architecture, local servers hosted on premises of the airlines themselves, point-to-point integration between different products, different vendors providing different products, which means that when you want to do these optimization problems where you really need the full picture of the aircraft operations in order to solve them, you run into difficulties in terms of I don't have access to the data, or it's an old legacy product that doesn't even archive their data, or the data governance has not been put into place in order to share the data between parties, or simply the data is just not available. So we run into a lot of data problems within aviation. It's getting better. Everybody's making progress, but it's definitely an industry that lags a bit behind, some of the other tech industries where, data is everywhere. In aviation, the data is there. It's just, in far too many places to be usable. So there are a lot of issues still on the aviation data side.
Okay.
And that's it. Yeah, I'll hand it back to you, Shir.
Thank you, Logan, for the talk. Our next researcher is Dr. Mehrdad Pirnia. He is a lecturer in Department of Management Science. He will be telling about applications of AI and optimization on operations of E-planes and intelligent aviation routing. Please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cao, for the introduction. And thanks to WISA for organizing such an insightful event connecting industry and academia. Well, in this talk, I go over one of our upcoming research projects for studying adaptation of electric planes in Canada and potential related operational and planning optimization models that we are going to consider. Well, electric planes are major evolution in airline industry after about 70 years since piston engines in 1953. And this new technology not only provides low carbon and low noise aviation, but also it has the potential to provide a smart microgrid structure in airports. And therefore, in our upcoming research, we plan to study the adaptability of one of the E-planes, Pipistrel E-plane in Canadian weather conditions, by using ML and optimization techniques in the context of flight training. They are still in the earlier stages to be used in larger scale. So we're just focusing on the flight training here. And of course, there are some concerns about the limitations of the batteries, such as their state of charge and state of health and their performance in different weather conditions. And because of that, the models that we are proposing are going to be designed by considerations of such limitations. And eventually, we are planning to create operational and planning models to benefit from low emission and low noise characteristics of E-planes in Canada. So in the next slide, if you go to, I go over more details on how we are planning to conduct this research. Well, all the applied research starts from a collection of data, and the data structure that we are planning to collect is a time series data, which records the E-plane's output, such as their airspeed and voltage at different power settings, and batteries' state of charge and state of health, and also external environmental conditions such as temperature, wind speed, and altitude, and also the stages of the flights, including whether they are in takeoff or type of the training exercise that they're going through, and for example, whether they are landing or not. So that would be giving us the data structure, all the features related to the data that we are going to consider. And after that, by analyzing the state of the batteries in different conditions, we are optimizing the flight settings and the patterns of charge and discharge to improve the efficiency of batteries in Canadian weather conditions. As for the predictive model, the collected data is used to train prediction models using machine learning methods to estimate the remaining life of the batteries based on given patterns of charge and discharge, and also the environmental conditions that we are considering. And the prescription of the best strategies is done by optimization to provide the optimal or near optimal operations of the E-planes while considering the state of the batteries. And the endurance of the E-planes is later evaluated under different conditions. So the resulting optimal flight training sequence that we are going to obtain utilizes the training time that we have, charging time, flight endurance, and batteries charge or recharge rate, and also increases the health of the batteries as well. So after coming up with these operational models, we are looking at some simulation studies to quantify pollution and noise reduction when we are incorporating these policies for different adaptation rates of E-planes in Canada. Also, as for the planning models, so far I talked about the operational models and just a little bit about the planning models, because we think the E-planes will be helping a lot with creation of the electric energy facilities to for charging their own batteries. So we are basically planning to come up with an optimization model to create an energy hub containing renewable energy sources, primarily solar, using solar hangars and storage capacities, which are typically used E-planes batteries to effectively extend the useful life of the batteries as well. So these energy hubs can later act as isolated microgrid or be connected to the distribution grid for situations when renewables or batteries are not available. So I think that concludes my talk here. I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Cao. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To tie into Dr. Pirnia's research in aviation routing, we have Julia Nuttall from NAV Canada. NAV Canada manages 18 million square kilometers of Canadian civil airspace and the North Atlantic Ocean airspace under Canada's control. Julia, please, that's your turn.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Shir. Good morning and afternoon to everyone, and thank you to WISA for having me on this panel. I'm excited to be here to talk about data and analytics. So like Shir said, NAV Canada's air navigation is Canada's air navigation service provider. We provide air traffic control, flight information services, and aeronautical publications for Canadian airspace. So today I thought it would be fun to share a simple example of an analysis and then talk a little bit about what we're focused on at NAV Canada as we look towards a data-driven future. So for the example analysis, I chose required navigation performance authorization required, or RNP-AR, because of the number of benefits that RNP-AR provides, including operational efficiencies, as well as its link to more sustainable aeronautics. So it's an important analysis because by communicating benefits, it can influence more airlines to equip their fleets and more airports and more ANSPs to implement the procedures. So the numbers I'm going to show are just for one airport, but they do become more impressive on an aggregate scale as the use of RNP-AR increases. So the map on the slide you see there on the left of the slide is Calgary International Airport. So the runways at Calgary are right in the middle of that map, and each line on that map represents one flight route. So the thicker the line, the more aircraft that are flying that route. RNP-AR are curved routes on approach that allow for continuous descent, fewer track miles, and they're designed with the communities underneath the approaches in mind from a noise perspective. So the blue and white routes on the map represent flights that are flying those RNP-AR approaches on arrivals. And those black lines are flight routes on arrivals that are not flying RNP-AR approaches. So it's clear from this map that RNP-AR has fewer track miles on arrival, and this leads to a reduction in fuel burn, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and there's a positive impact on noise. The line graph on the right shows the number of RNP-AR approaches at Calgary over time, a daily average per day. It only includes data up to the end of 2019. As we know with COVID, there was a significant reduction in flights, which resulted in a reduction in RNP-AR approaches. So you can see there's a spike, a large spike in the number of RNP-AR approaches towards the end of 2018. So that's because in September 2018, new tangent procedures were implemented, which increased the use of RNP-AR. And then on November 8th, 2018, NAV Canada actually implemented the very first use of established on RNP-AR at Calgary. And so EOR enables simultaneous approaches to be conducted on one or more of the parallel runways at Calgary. On the next map from January 2019, you can now see there's way more flight routes that are flying RNP-AR approaches. The new tangent procedures are also easy to identify, and there's less concentration in the black flight routes or those non-RNP-AR arrivals. These two visualizations can show quite quickly the increase in RNP-AR use and the new tangent procedures. So these maps were created in RStudio, and the code first pulled NAV Canada surveillance feeds and then integrated that data with our flight data warehouse to get flight attributes. So the arrival runways were based on specific thresholds, and those RNP-AR routes were pulled based on different procedure, latitude, longitude, and altitude specific to each RNP-AR approach. Visuals are a really important part of analysis because they convey a lot of information quickly. So visualization skills and interactive visualization skills are definitely becoming more important and a skill that we're hiring for when we're looking for data analysts. So I'm going to quickly run through the numbers of this analysis. So there's been an increase in the percentage of equipped flights that fly RNP-AR approaches from 32% in September 2018 to 67% in 2019. There were 35,000 RNP-AR approaches, which led to 250,000 track miles saved for 2019. So that's 250,000 track miles for just one airport and 1 year. So you can imagine how much higher it is when the use is aggregated and how much it can increase as more flights use these efficient procedures. So an analysis that explains and quantifies the savings can really help to influence an increase. As an ANSP, we have some of the data and can do part of the analysis, but we don't always have all of the data. So we can estimate, for example, how 250,000 saved track miles can translate to fuel saved based on average fuel models. But we'd rather work with stakeholders and communicate the results more on a collaborative basis using collaborative analytics, which ties to my next slide of looking towards a data-driven future. So partnerships and data sharing with airlines, airport authorities, other ANSPs, and academia will be an important piece of our data-driven future. There's a lot of collaboration that's done in aviation in terms of planning and implementation, but we sometimes fall a bit short when it comes to collaboration in data analysis. So we do have some data sharing agreements in place, and we've definitely seen some benefits, but we think a lot more can be done. So that's why I'm so excited about WISA. I think WISA will be very helpful in this regard to facilitate new partnerships. We're also working on our environmental, social, and governance strategy, which will lay out our strategy for a sustainable future and will be based on data. So an important part of our ESG reporting is ensuring that our metrics are well-defined and based on quality data. Industry alignment will be crucial because we need to ensure consistent and transparent reporting, especially when reporting on the same initiative. And finally, to complete the aircraft, accurate, timely, and complete data and analysis will be required to drive informed decision-making and demonstrate value for aviation stakeholders. Industry initiatives need to be properly measured right from the outset, and we want to ensure that those initiatives provide operational efficiencies while balancing predictability and flexibility in the aviation ecosystem. Back to you, Shar. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. So now we're going to move forward to the next session of question and answers. If we can have everyone to show their video feed, we'll just help people know we're talking. Okay, thank you very much. Now let's begin. I have collected some of the questions. Since we have limited time, each speaker, please limit your response in about 2 minutes, and I will direct the questions to each person. So let's start with a question to Logan. What might be a way to create the task force for collecting, organizing, and centralizing all the data you mentioned, right? There are flight data from different versions of technologies currently existing in different organizations. What do you think might be a practical way that we can pull all these data and work with human resources together to tackle this problem? Do people like to share the data with others, or they want to keep them as kind of private, secret? Like, how do you think we can overcome those challenges?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say 5 years ago, a lot has changed in the last 5 years. 5 years ago would have been very difficult. I think most airlines were, keeping their data very close to their operations, very secret, not willing to share. But I think with the era of big data and the airlines starting to see this advantage of making their data more open, and that the more people you have, possibly looking at their data and looking for efficiency and solutions, the better you can operate as an airline. So we've seen a lot of change in the last 5 years. On the Airbus side, Airbus has started a big data platform called Skywise. The whole idea there is to get more and more airlines and actually every part of the value chain contributing their data into the Skywise platform. And then the platform itself allows you to be able to fuse the data, parse the data, run pipelines, and start to extract analytics. Again, and with the idea of being able to, even within an airline, some actors don't always have data. The flight operations might not have access to the maintenance data, and the maintenance data might not have access to the network planning. So just trying to bring the data together in a centralized place in a proper fashion, we're making progress. We're not there yet. These platforms are starting to evolve, but I think the more, especially again with WISA, with the research that we're doing, the more you show the airlines, the network planners, the ANSPs, the NAV Canadas, the FAAs, the power of bringing the data together. And as we try to move towards more sustainable aviation, the data is going to be the key to unlocking that. So we're making progress. Every year, we're getting more and more data. So hopefully, when we have this conversation again in 2 years, we'll have a much more cohesive data ecosystem to show.
Thank you, Logan. I think that's exactly one of the reasons why we're building WISA, where we are having those seminars to pull those efforts together.
I just like to add to that,
please.
because we are working a lot on collaborative analytics, and I would agree with Logan that we've come a long way. I think we have some data sharing agreements at NAV Canada as well, and we've seen a lot of benefits of just bringing it together, right? Because we have a piece of the puzzle, airlines have a piece of the puzzle, and really understanding the needs of each of the parties, I think, is just going to drive the aviation industry forward in so many ways. So I think it's so important, and I think we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
Thank you. Next question, I'd like to direct that to researchers. How do you avoid analytics drowning in data? Like, suppose in 1 or 2 years, we have so much data. Is there any new technology algorithms that can maybe help people make more sense or explain the data in an easier way rather than lost in this huge amount of sea of data? And maybe let's start with Professor Gzara. One specific question to you is maybe related more to the details of the network analysis method you mentioned.
Okay, so I guess those two questions are a bit independent. So in terms of data analytics and the tools in data analytics and how they can adapt to the large scale of data, there is a lot of innovation there, and a lot of times it's based on need. For the descriptive part, for example, we've been using R a lot. They just have amazing tools. Everything you think about, there is a tool for it in R, and the displays or the illustrations are very good quality. In a recent course that I gave to a set of professionals on using data analytics in supply chain, we used R there, and they were amazed on the richness of the tools that are available. So the good thing is also R is free, and it's quite user-friendly. So I use it in teaching too, because I think it's the tool of the future for the descriptive part. And then I'm not if you want, a machine learning person, but I use a lot of machine learning tools. In the predictive part, so there is a lot of advances there in terms of the tools dealing with large data, with messy data, with not very well behaving data. So I guess it's all problem dependent, and it's the researcher or the people who are working on that specific topic who will try just a bunch of tools and figure out which ones are best. That's how I use it, because I do not necessarily develop machine learning tools. I use what's there because I'm not a machine learning person, but I know I have colleagues who do machine learning, and they do a lot of, and we do have a lot of expertise at the University of Waterloo in that domain too, and they do a lot of innovations in that aspect. In terms of optimization and the prescriptive part of data analytics, it's a never evolving ship. We continue to build models and solutions. And the biggest issue with data and optimization is the large scale. So how to solve those problems efficiently and quickly, and that's where our research comes in. It's developing large scale methods for those problems. So do you want me to answer the other question too? I don't want to be speaking.
Maybe let's leave that for a later round. Let's maybe give Mehrdad a chance to comment.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Gzara that there has been a huge advancement in machine learning technologies, basically, and tools that we have. And the good thing is all these tools most of the tools are open access. And, from the educational side, students are learning the introductory knowledge to be able to apply them when it comes to cleaning data, visualizing the data, and so on. And one important thing is right now we have cloud computing and so on as well. So I understand the size of the data when it comes to airline industry can get very big, actually. But the main question is how we are defining big data these days, whether it's gigabytes or terabytes or petabytes or I think there is no notion of big data anymore because, like whatever it is that we have tools and computational hardware and mechanisms to be able to apply. But before collecting data, I believe we need some good mechanisms to collect the data and try to have a very coordinated way on how we are mapping the different features, what are the needed parts of the data that we have to collect. So we're not spending time on things that we don't need at all, actually. So this is my take on this question. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, there's a question regarding Allyson mentioned big data training. I'm interested in this, like how can we as researchers collaborate with you or other partners? Do you have a current platform for data set network sharing? How to collaborate and what kind of data do you already have or have the plan to collect in the future?
So I think, Logan and Julia both touched on a lot of collaboration that's currently going on. I think one of the challenges that we face when we bring pilots or cabin crew into the equation is the privacy element. So this is still a very big wall. And that's where we're looking at where do we anonymize data? Where do we de-identify data? How do we make data a comfortable thing for everybody? And that's what we're looking at specifically, is not just we can get training from operations. So anything that's done within the aircraft, anything that's coming off the aircraft. We can also get data from simulators, from instructor reports. Some of it's digitalized, some of it's not. We can bring that together. It's as Dr. Gzara said, it's messy and it's not nice. That's why we're trying to put some guidelines around it. But in terms of data sharing and collaboration, when we talk about it from a training standpoint, we have a lot of hurdles to go, because we have to not only just think about the airline, we have to think about the union, the individual, the governing body, not just YASA or the FAA or Transport Canada, but also the European Union or the Canadian government or the governments around the world. So we are actively trying to understand, how do we help people collaborate? How do we help the current stakeholders understand what data is going to do for us? How to get people comfortable with it? Because I can understand students today, they can't understand the discomfort on some of the higher levels, but that's where we need to come together and really help bridge that gap and have these conversations to make it more comfortable.
Yeah, thank you, Allyson. Indeed, the privacy is indeed a very challenging problem, but important. Next question I'd like to ask Jingru to address. From the point of view of a student audience, can you comment on how do you feel the best way to connect a student researcher with the industry? And for students who are going to graduate in this challenging area of COVID, how do you think they could best do the transition from school to the workplace? Any skill sets particularly you find important?
Thanks for the question. So from my personal experience, I think even though right now we're in a very critical phase of stage right now with the COVID, but there's still opportunities there, because airlines are recovering, and though there's, we're still in a pandemic, but there's lots of opportunities coming up, I believe, because the recovering speed is actually faster than we expected. People are more willing to travel after this long period of lockdown. So I think don't lose hope. There's still opportunity there. And then there's I think one of my mentors when I entered the industry told me one thing is just to learn as a sponge, to get into the industry as whenever opportunity presents, and then just to explore more areas, because in aviation and industry, there's lots of areas that can be learned. There's flight operations, and there's maintenance, there's cabin safety, there's scheduling. There's so many disciplines. So just find your interest and try to talk to more people and learn where your best interests are, and then just go for it. I think that's my advice from my personal experience.
Thank you, Jingru. I thank you on behalf of the student audience. Next question is very specific about in NAVBLUE and NAV Canada. A question to Logan and Julia. What kind of optimization solution are currently being used?
Sure. I mean, I can definitely start. And actually, just to add on the last topic, in terms of the different skills from an industry perspective, I think, often when you think of a data analytics team, you think about all the technical skills, but we're really trying to make sure that we have a diverse set of skills on our analytics teams. And there really is a role for so many different skills. So of course, synthesizing large amounts of data and being able to tell a story with that. But we're also looking for creativity. We have people with the computer science, the stats background, but we also have people that come from more of an arts background, an aviation background. So I think that interdisciplinary role and making sure that there's a diverse team in place is really important. So we're looking for a lot of different skills, but definitely creativity and curiosity are big. From optimization perspective or data analytics solution, aviation is such a safety-focused industry. So one example I'll bring up from a safety perspective is an analysis that we've done is looking at runway incursions and actually mapping out at airports exactly where they occur, and then working with the operations to understand why there are certain hotspots, and then actually optimizing and changing, making solutions to solve those hotspots and actually change some things that led to a reduction in runway incursions. So that's one example, but there's so many different examples of how data analytics can really optimize the industry. Pass it on to you, Logan.
Yeah, and I think at NAVBLUE, what we're really looking at today is predictability. So because a lot of our solutions and services are about creating a plan and then operating a plan, what we're seeing in the data right now is that a lot of the operators are creating a plan and then flying or operating something different. So what that means is there's some sort of gap, and our work now is about getting deeper into the data. So right now we just see the data picture that they planned something and they operated something differently. So now what we need to do is to dive deeper into the data, with the help of collaboration with researchers to really understand why. What was the key issue or issues that caused them to deviate from their plan? Because every time you make a deviation, that's a cost. So either we need to make a better plan by understanding the uncertainty in the airspace, the uncertainty in your operations or your crew or your maintenance, and help the airlines build a better plan and operate that plan. The more predictability an airline has into their operations, the better and more efficiently they'll be able to run their operations.
Thank you. We have so many questions that we won't be able to cover all of them. So our plan is to collect all of them and do an offline Q&A session posted online afterwards. Please keep tuned for that. For the remaining time, I do like to invite each panelist members to think about one or a few sentences, the most important you want the audience to take away from today's webinar. Think about that, and then I'll just call out names based on the order I see on the screen. Personally, I feel that data analytics, big data is becoming very important. Based on my limited understanding of aviation industry, I feel that a lot of technologies, especially information technology, can be applied into optimization, routing, planning, as well as human resource management and crew member training and selection. In the research community, we have specific methods that we need to closely collaborate with our industry collaborators in order to make sure the research will be able to be practical and solve addressing a real world problem rather than just any hypothetical scenarios. So now maybe let's take turns to give our final remarks. I'll start with Julia Nuttall.
Sure. Yeah, I think, I mean, there's definitely a huge role for data and analytics to play. I think the collaborative analytics is really going to be so important to collaborate on it, make sure that we're solving the right problems. What are the problems we need to solve? Understanding the needs of all of the different players in the aviation industry, and then coming up with solutions where we can bring our data together, the different parts of data, right? Because like I mentioned, as NAV Canada, we have some of the data, but we don't have all of it. As an airline, they would have some of the data. So really merging that data together to come up with holistic solutions. And I think through collaboration, we can increase the accuracy and the trust in our analytics, as well as reduce overall costs. So I think collaborative analytics is what I would say the takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mehrdad, please.
Yeah, I think the role of data in aviation is very important, and hopefully we are getting into the place that we have this collective agreement with the data, and we have this platform that researchers and industry can both use. And I believe one of the main challenges that basically educational institute will be facing when it comes to research is solving the problem of online planning for airlines. As Logan mentioned, there are so many uncertainties happening after the flight planning is done. But how we can keep that in mind when things are getting changed in the real time, and how these optimization algorithms that we are developing can be connected to each other. For example, one route is changing, that will be impacting the other routes, and that will be creating congestion in the path that we are considering. So how it can be like how all these optimization planning can be coordinated by each other, which I think using machine learning and data analytics and optimization all together can solve these problems, hopefully in the near future.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Allyson.
As I listened to everybody speak about their different presentations today, what came to me is the huge responsibility that we're undertaking in terms of bringing all of this data together and understanding it and the message that we're trying to get across. So I think that there's just a huge responsibility in getting this right, because what you present is what people believe. They might interpret it in different ways. So it's about how do you collect it, how do you display it, how do you use it, and how do you do that from an ethical and responsible way. I think that's something that we really need to consider.
Thank you. Fatma, please.
Okay, so first, Chair, I want to mention that I answered the two questions in the chat, the one about the role of data analytics on global warming and the other on network modeling at a high level. And yeah, I'd be happy to answer questions offline too. So I guess the main takeaway for me from this talk is a reinforcement of one of my beliefs, which is there's lots of problems that industry face, and we have lots of expertise at the University of Waterloo, at the Waterloo Analytics and Optimization Lab, and we certainly can help. So I hope that WISA would be a great platform to bring the needs and the tools together for a better future.
That's great, thanks. Next, Jingru, please.
For me, it's a great opportunity to attend this seminar today. I learned so much from the panel, and I was very impressive that so much data has been collected and be used in our daily work. I certainly feel like one takeaway for me is that right now we're still there's still many challenges for us to solve to move from a more active way to a more proactive way of using the data that we're having right now. So this is, I think, a major direction that we are working in the future to solve those challenges, because we have so much data that we can use. The question is that how we could use those data to proactively, identify risks and improve the operational safety and sustainability of the entire industry. That's my takeaway from today's seminar. Thank you.
Thanks. And Logan?
Yeah, so I would say, aviation today is definitely at a crossroads with regards to sustainability. And the key to unlocking sustainability is going to lie in the data and optimization. And what I'd say is, I think within aviation, definitely don't underestimate the impact of small changes. Aviation is such a high cost industry that, as we saw with, with Julia's slides from NAV Canada, even saving 40 kilos of fuel on an approach, it doesn't sound like much. And, it sounds like maybe doing this wouldn't make much of a difference, but applying that over 10,000 flights, and now suddenly we've saved 400 tons, of fuel being burnt. So very small changes, because of just the global nature of aviation and then the costs associated to flying airplanes, very small changes can have a very large impact. So there's a lot to do on data and optimization, a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can work on in order to be able to contribute to sustainability within aviation.
Okay, that's all. Thank you very much. A huge thank to everyone who has joined us today for our second WISA Talks. Thank you to our researchers and industry partners for participating. One of the objectives of WISA is to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion. I thank the audience for their contribution to promote EDI and join the conversation and respect each other, no matter where they're from and whatever their background is. Next time, I welcome you to join our WISA Talk number 3, which will be on Thursday, February the 10th at 4 p.m. For our third talks with the topic of environmental initiative in aviation, hosted by our Associate Director of the Environmental Pillar, Dr. Paul Parker. The webinar will discuss the many environmental initiatives that are being developed to reduce carbon emission and minimize the environmental impacts of various aeronautics activities. The invitation to this webinar will be hitting your box shortly. So thank you again very much, and have a great day to everyone. Bye-bye. Should we clap our hands? All right, see you.